Today, we talk about a wild, drug-fueled crime spree that ended the lives of 17 people in 17 days, including the annihilation of 2 entire families. We'll take a close look at the 2 men responsible for some truly heinous crimes and follow their trail of terror and devastation across the Southwest. And, of course, we eat the last meal of the convicted murderer, although this meal bites back.
Not feeling so good.
All on this episode of The Last Supper.
Welcome to the Last Supper podcast. I'm Peter.
I'm Jess.
We're back here today to tell you another story about crime while we eat some food. So, without further ado, let's unveil the food. Jess, she doesn't know what's under here.
I have no idea.
So if you saw our last episode, it was quite a bit of food. It was a lot of food. This one, it's a little light on food, but heavier on the crime. Let's unveil this and we'll see what's under here.
Oh, it looks like breakfast.
Yeah, it's, I think this guy wanted a breakfast supper. So let's just kind of look at what we got here. We got some coffee here. He said 1 cup of real coffee.
Real coffee.
So probably, in the prison, I think it was just like pour the instant coffee and mix it kind of thing. We're not much of coffee drinkers, so we just got some great value French roast. I thought it was French toast. and I was a little tired yesterday when I bought everything, so I got French roast instead of French toast, but that's okay. We got some Coke here, and he wanted 2 Cokes with ice. Also, some slices of toast we got. We got 4 strips of bacon, chewy. He did not like crispy bacon. He wants it chewy. That's how I like it. I don't know how you like it.
I'm not picky about my bacon. I like all bacons.
And then we also have, I have 6 fried eggs.
Oh, whoa. And looks like I don't have any eggs.
Yes, because you can't eat eggs.
I do have a food sensitivity to eggs. I could probably eat like 1 egg.
If you want to try it, I fried them in bacon grease.
Well, that sounds good.
In the fall of 1973, 2 men drove south from Colorado into Arizona and then to California, robbing, kidnapping, and murdering people they encountered along the way during their twisted road trip. In a gruesome finale, they entered a home where they bound, gagged, and shot 9 people to death, including 2 children. But who were these men, and how could they commit such brutal acts?
So let's go over who we're going to talk about today. His name is Douglas Gretzler, and he is a death row inmate in Arizona.
Another Arizona guy.
Yeah, we got 2 Arizona guys so far. Gotta rep the home state. We'll talk a little bit about the background here of this guy and his crimes and stuff. He went on a little bit of a murder spree.
Douglas Gretzler was born May 21st, 1951, in the Bronx, New York. In the early 1950s, the Gretzler family moved to the working-class suburb of Tuckahoe, where his father served as president of the school district. The man was a strict disciplinarian who demanded obedience and academic excellence from his children, often subjecting them to physical and mental punishment for any failure or disobedience. It was obvious to Doug that his older brother Mark was his father's favorite. being the good and popular student that he was. The elder children of the family were often compared to Mark and could never measure up. By contrast, Doug typically got C or D grades. His parents even got him tested for aptitude, which revealed he was actually intelligent, just not motivated. Still, young Doug craved his father's approval and affection. At age 10, finally receiving a good grade at school, Doug eagerly ran home to show his father his report card, only to have his father glance at it, toss it aside, and tell his son he expected better of him. Doug repeatedly tried to please his father as a young boy, but eventually gave up. By the time he was 11, he instead started finding ways to spite his father and focused on either leisure activities outside the home or playing his drums in the family basement. By 1966, Doug had begun smoking marijuana, which really angered his father. A heated argument erupted between the two of them, ending in his father, who was 6 feet 4 inches tall and 200 pounds, grabbing Doug by the collar and slamming him against the bedroom wall. The two crashed through the wall and fell onto the bathroom floor on the other side. Thereafter, his father never failed to remind Doug of his utter disappointment in him. Although his parents arranged weekly family counseling sessions, they weren't really much help. His father refused to listen and even shoved one of the counselors, who insinuated that he could be to blame for Doug's defiant attitude. Then one day, his father discovered his son Mark had stolen and handed out copies of the answers to upcoming school exams to other students as a prank. When he was caught, the school banned him from all senior year activities, including participating in graduation ceremonies. His father was furious and let him know he had disgraced the family. Then, on August 16, 1966, Mr. Gretzler called the family to dinner. He was going to discuss the punishment he was planning to give to Mark. Mark, however, didn't show up. His father went to Mark's bedroom, where there was a commotion heard, and Mr. Gretzler yelled for someone to call an ambulance and the other children to stay put in their rooms. During the ensuing confusion, Doug slipped into his brother's room and saw Mark lying in a pool of blood on the bed. He had shot himself in the head. Afterwards, Doug wondered why he didn't feel sad like the others. He only felt a weird sense of pride and envy. He marveled at his brother's courage to end his own life. For months afterward, Doug would mutter to himself, "He did it. He really did it." Doug's father took the death of his favorite son really hard. He spent a lot of time drinking in his office in the family basement. One day, he emerged from the basement with a bottle of liquor and stumbled towards Doug. He looked his son in the eyes and asked, "Why, Mark? Why couldn't it have been you?" A couple years after his brother's death, Doug began taking other drugs, such as mescaline and LSD, and his relationship with his father only further deteriorated. At school, Doug earned the nickname Lambie among his peers, though by his senior year he was also known as Tuckahoe's Pied Piper of drugs, since he was the person his classmates would go to for whatever drug they wanted. In 1970, Doug married a young woman named Judith, and they moved into an apartment in the Bronx. A couple years later, Doug's daughter Jessica was born. At first, Doug enjoyed being a husband and father, but soon he tired of the constant responsibility. He also couldn't handle holding onto a job for very long and invariably quit each attempt after a matter of just days or weeks. Of course, this led to frequent arguments with his wife, who worked full-time at a local bank. As he explained to her, he couldn't handle people telling him he had to do something, and that included her. Doug started spending increased amounts of time away from home. he began committing petty crimes, although he was never arrested for them. Doug was still using drugs as well. In fact, he found himself using drugs more and more as a way to escape the drudgery and stressful responsibility in life. And he realized he felt better when he didn't feel anything at all. For his 21st birthday, Doug inherited a trust fund of several $1,000s from a wealthy relative. Though he, his wife, and child were struggling financially, Doug spent most of the money on a 1967 MGB sports car and probably more drugs. His life became just focused on that car and getting his daily high. He dreamed of just getting in his car and driving away, nowhere in particular, just getting away from it all. After being hounded by his wife and his father, Doug managed to get a job at a concrete factory. But after a few months, he just stopped coming to work. When his father found out, he let his son have it. "You have never done one good thing in your life," he screamed. Somehow, despite the tensions, the Gretzler family managed to spend Christmas together. It would be the last one in which they would all be together because on December 26th, when his wife Judy left for work and took their daughter to a babysitter, Doug threw some clothes into a duffel bag, jumped in his car, and left without leaving a note or any kind of explanation, never to return. He headed west in his MGB, arriving in Casper, Wyoming on December 27th, where he lived for the next 6 months. Doug met a guy who invited him to Denver, promising him a lot of good dope and good people. So Doug left for Colorado, where he would meet the man who would change his life forever. William Steelman, known as Bill or Willie to his family and friends, was born on March 21st, 1945, in Lodi, California. He was the youngest of 3 children. In 1935, the Steelman family had come from Oklahoma to California, where Willie's father found work as a foreman on a farm. The family had little money, and both parents worked long hours and had little time to spend with their children. The responsibility for raising Willie largely fell to his 14-year-old sister, Frances. In fact, when he was old enough to speak, Willie would call Frances Mommy. As the baby of the family, he learned to enjoy being the center of attention. Not just attention from his family, but from visitors to the Steelman house as well. Usually other farm laborers, rough types, who took delight in teaching young Willie every vulgar word they knew. When Willie's sister married and moved to Denver, he was heartbroken. Now he was left with an older brother and a mother he felt he barely knew, and a father he loved but could not be close to. You see, his father, Lester, was sick, and his illness was getting worse. Lester had gotten scarlet fever as a child and was left with a leaky and enlarged heart. The adults of the family would warn Willie not to do anything that might upset his father, because it could kill him, even so much as a slammed door or a bad report from school. Sometimes, when Willie would try to talk to his father, Lester would get an attack of pain and scream out while clutching at his chest. Willie would run to his mother sobbing, certain that he must have done something wrong. Then, in September of 1958, when Willie was 13, his father passed away. Willie was never the same. The sweet boy became an angry teenager. Though he had once been a good student, now Willie had trouble concentrating and obeying teachers. One day, after arguing with his teacher about his repeated tardiness, he got up and walked out of class. but he returned later that afternoon with a gas can and lighter and set the teacher's desk on fire, then left the school and never returned. He started committing petty crimes, things like stealing tires or car batteries, and even broke into people's houses and sheds. He wasn't able to keep a job, and although he enlisted in the Navy in 1962, he was discharged just a few months later because he refused to follow orders. In the fall of 1963, his mother, exasperated with him, sent Willie to Denver to live with his sister. However, Frances sent him right back a few weeks later, telling her mother that she didn't recognize him anymore and that he was scaring her and her children. By age 19, Willie had his first serious run-in with the law. He had forged a name on some stolen checks and used them around town. The judge was persuaded to drop the charges after Willie's mother was able to come up with $200 to cover the bad checks, and Willie charmed the court with an apology and a promise to stay out of trouble. "I honestly don't know why I did it," he said, "but I've learned my lesson, you can be sure." However, not long after, Willie was right back at it again, writing an estimated $500 worth of bad checks all over town. This time, Willie was convicted of forgery and spent nearly 7 months at a rehabilitative prison camp for young men. Following his release, Willie got a job as a field hand, and he met Sharon, a 15-year-old girl whom he married. But within a couple of weeks, things were already falling apart. He quit his job, and he and his wife had to live off money from family and friends. Then, in January of 1966, he was arrested again for cashing stolen checks. Not only was it not his first offense, but he had violated his parole. While in the county jail, Sharon's parents annulled their marriage. According to various interviews, during this time, Willie was emotionally unstable and seemed to be a different person depending on the day. Some days he would be quiet, tearful, and remorseful. Other days he was loud and defiant, telling outlandish stories about crimes he had gotten away with. One interview that was made note of by his parole officer stated, "Steelman indicates that he needs help and seems to feel that he may hurt somebody someday unless, quote, I get help." He reportedly loses his temper quite easily, makes threats, and has, in fact, struck his wife, so he says. While in jail, Willie made multiple failed attempts to end his own life, one time swallowing about a dozen tiny nails he removed from the soles of his shoes, and then feigning unconsciousness until he was taken to the hospital. Another time, he melted down a few checkers into a glob and swallowed it. Finally, he was taken to a hospital and classified as mentally ill. While at the hospital, he was popular with both the staff and the patients, and he seemed to have figured out how to tell them exactly what they wanted to hear. 5 days after having been given ground privileges, Willie simply walked off the hospital grounds and didn't return. The hospital decided to discharge him and change his classification to not mentally ill, as well as issue him a certificate of competency. But now that he was no longer a patient in the hospital, he was put back in jail. And 3 weeks later, the court sentenced him to 14 years prison time. While doing his time at the California Men's Colony, Willie was a model inmate and even obtained his GED. He was granted parole after serving just 2 years and released on September 16, 1968. He returned to Lodi, got a job, and told people he had turned his life around. However, this didn't last long. He started doing drugs, drinking, and hanging around teenagers, buying them beers and seemingly trying to impress them in hopes they would look up to him. Just 3 months after his release from prison, he was arrested for giving LSD to two 16-year-old girls. For this, he was sentenced to 43 days imprisonment and given a fine. Then Willie met a young woman named Denise, who was a senior in high school at the time, who he married in June of 1969. Denise's account of her time with Willie makes him sound like a Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde type of character. At times, he seemed childlike, eager to please, and peace-loving. He told her that he prayed for peace and thought it was so sad that people couldn't get along. Another time, he told her that his father had tried to teach him to hunt. "I tried to miss on purpose," he said, "because I just couldn't imagine killing anything." Other times, he would fly into fits of rage, or he would shirk any responsibilities, unable to hold on to a job, and squandering any money on drugs, or trying to buy his friends by giving away what little he had. Denise recalled a time, soon after they had first met, when they were making out in his car out in front of a record store. They noticed a small crowd of people watching from the record store window. Willie went berserk and ran into the store, threatening to kill everyone there. He had picked up an iron pipe, and his eyes were glazed over and had a blank stare. Later, when Denise asked what happened, he swore he couldn't remember any of it, and even accused her of lying about the whole thing. By 1972, Willie's drug dependency had increased, and he had been arrested for a variety of offenses, although each time the charges were either dropped or he was just given a small fine. Then he had an accident in which he fell on a sidewalk, which sent him to the hospital. He complained of bad headaches and blackouts and claimed nothing would relieve the pain. So he tried getting any kind of prescription drug a doctor would give him. That spring, he got a job as an orderly at a convalescent hospital. He was well liked by everyone there, but he used his position to gain access to the storeroom, where he would down whatever pills he could find. He also got a hold of an endless supply of prescription pads, and his old forgery skills came in handy. He used them not only for himself, but to win favor with friends. Then, on New Year's Day, 1973, Willie's wife left him. She could no longer tolerate his behavior and was tired of being broke and her money paying for his drug addiction, and also because he was seeing a 17-year-old girl named Lisa, who he might have gotten pregnant. Lisa's parents eventually forbade her from seeing him. All of this seemed to send Willie into a tailspin. His drug use was at an all-time high. A crazy mix of heroin, speed, hash, and all kinds of prescription drugs. He began snatching purses to steal whatever money he could get, as well as any kind of medication that might be in there. One time, he downed a whole plastic case full of pills, then showed the empty container to his equally strung-out friend and asked if he knew what it was and why it wasn't working. "Bill," his friend said, "you just did a whole month's worth of birth control pills. At least you don't gotta worry about getting knocked up." In June, Willie missed a meeting with his parole officer, who notified the authorities, who then issued a warrant for his arrest. Willie decided it was time for him to leave town, although it wouldn't be long before he would return. Willie showed up at his sister's house in Denver, ostensibly to visit, although he then moved into an unfurnished area of the house and refused to pay rent or find employment. Francis's daughter, Terry, enjoyed her uncle's company, and she and her teenage friends would hang out with him, and he would tell them stories and try to earn their admiration. Through Terry, Willie met a 17-year-old named Marcia, a free-spirited tomboy who had sworn off men. She was one of many youngsters who became impressed with Steelman's outlandish stories of bravado and crime. She and Willie also bonded over the loss of their fathers at a young age.
You want one of these eggs? You want to try one?
Yeah, I'll try one. Hopefully it won't make me sick, but we'll see.
I'm not like the biggest egg fan, I don't think.
You know, I have an egg sensitivity, but I have a flock of chickens. An unfortunate irony.
One afternoon in September, Doug Gretzler showed up at Francis's house in Denver. People were always coming and going and partying with Willie, though they were always younger than him. This was also true of Doug, though he was the only one who had a car, so he became their chauffeur. At this point, Doug's criminal record consisted only of minor traffic charges and 1 count of vagrancy. But now he was into hardcore drug use, and methamphetamine was his drug of choice. At first, drugs were the only common bond between the two men. They would stay loaded all night, talking about all kinds of things. Willie had finally found someone intelligent enough to converse with, and Doug had found someone who listened to him and respected his opinions and didn't put him down as his father always had.
So Gretzler and Steelman, which it kind of sounds like it could be like a law firm or something, you know, Gretzler and Steelman at law. But I don't think you want these guys representing you in anything, really.
Yeah, I don't think I would choose them as my lawyers.
Yeah, they sound pretty bad so far, and what I know is coming next, you definitely don't want them anywhere near you.
Soon, Doug and Willie started talking about ways to get money. Willie taught Doug how to snatch purses, and they talked about trying some armed robbery. Shortly thereafter, Willie duped a teenage boy into providing them with a shotgun. He also got a young woman who was infatuated with him to buy him a .22 rifle, and Doug shortened the barrels of both. The two began devising ways of committing more serious crimes without being caught. They developed what they would later refer to as the Pact. According to Willie, any heist or scam needed a team, and each member of the team had to agree to back the other's play, regardless of the situation or the consequences. There had to be someone who called the shots, planned the deals, and made sure they followed them through. Willie said he should be the one to do it, since they were out west and he was more familiar with the territory. Doug was fine with it. He was always willing to let someone else make the decisions anyway. Willie's sister was in financial trouble. The house was in danger of being taken by the bank, and then the furnace broke. Doug offered up the title to his car so she could leverage a small loan to fix the furnace and hold off the bank for a while. Willie and Doug watched her go to her car to go down to the bank. Before leaving, she remembered leaving something in the house. She set her purse in the car and ran inside. When she returned minutes later, her purse, along with the car title, was gone. She suspected her brother of stealing it, but decided to just let the bank have the house. She moved with her children into a nearby apartment on September 30th. Informing her brother that the house was all his until the bank kicked him out. Willie never said a word to her as she left, only glared at her with a look that gave her chills. And that would be the last time she saw her brother.
Pretty good.
Is this a thick cut bacon? Or is it regular?
It's uncured.
Uncured. I know our dog was going crazy earlier, probably for the bacon.
Oh yeah. When I pulled that bacon out, she flew out of her spot and on top of the couch and almost knocked the couch over. That was crazy.
It was October, and the weather was getting cold in Denver, and there was still no heat in the house. Willie decided it was time to leave and go someplace warmer. Phoenix would be the destination, as he had some connections there. Upon hearing this, Marcia asked if she could go along, hoping to see a 21-year-old woman named Yaffa, who now lived there, with whom she was infatuated. Doug would also go along, and they would use his car. The three of them left Denver on October 9th. They traveled through New Mexico and into Arizona, doing various drugs the whole while. Weed, assorted pills, acid, and some peyote given to them by a waitress at a roadside diner. But they were running out of gas and money. On October 13th, while on the highway outside of Globe, Arizona, they spotted a Cadillac parked off the side of the road. Willie suspected whoever drove it had money. So they pulled over, grabbed the .22 and the shotgun, and marched down into the nearby ravine. That's when they saw the owner of the car, sunbathing nude along with his girlfriend. With weapons drawn, Willie announced, "Really hate to bother you two, but we're out of money and out of gas." The embarrassed man reached for his pants and wallet and handed over about $20 cash. Willie took $5 and tossed the rest back to the guy. "Check this out," he said. "I want you to know I'm not the type to take all a dude's money. I recommend you two stay here for a while and try being a little more careful from now on." Before leaving, Doug popped the hood of the caddy, yanked out the distributor cap, and threw it as far as he could down into the canyon. By the time they got close to Tempe, the $5 had long been spent, and they were looking for their next target. That's when they saw a hitchhiker walking along the road, thumb out, and the glint of a ring upon his finger. The trio picked him up, drove to a secluded orchard, and demanded his money. When his wallet only produced a couple of bills, Willie asked if he had anything more. The man said no. Unsatisfied, Willie commanded him to strip down, then searched his pockets. When he found $20 in a pants pocket, Willie went berserk and started pistol whipping the man, while Doug tied him to a tree with his own clothes. They took off with the man's money and his ring, which they pawned for $60 when they reached Phoenix. There, they also stole a woman's purse containing $20 and some checks.
These people that just got the robberies and everything, those are the lucky ones.
Doesn't seem like exactly they're at like grand theft level, but maybe they're kind of funding their road trip, crime spree or whatever.
Yeah, let's go on a crime spree road trip.
Shortly after their arrival in Phoenix, Willie went to do some business with a man he referred to as Preacher.
Yeah, it's a good nickname for a drug dealer or someone that handles drugs.
Because I'm guessing he wasn't like an actual ordained minister.
No, he was a minister of the streets.
Okay.
He was administering some drugs to people, probably.
He returned, claiming he was involved in a hit on Preacher's brother, where a gunfight ensued, resulting in the death of both Preacher and his brother, as well as an associate of Preacher's brother. Though Willie was a little banged up, no evidence was ever found to verify this story. The main reason Marcia wanted to go along with Willie and Doug to Phoenix was to see Yaffa, the dark-haired, patchouli-scented 21-year-old young woman with whom she was smitten. Yaffa was originally Catherine from New York, but had changed her name and moved to Denver, which is where Marcia met her. Yaffa's passion was the occult. She practiced tarot card reading, numerology, and candle magic, and considered herself a white witch. Her official business, however, was as a masseuse, and her side gigs were buying and selling drugs and prostitution. Although Marcia and Yaffa's only shared interest was getting high, Marcia felt a connection to Yaffa. She had confided in her that the only two men she had allowed herself to get close to had died: her father from an aneurysm, and her high school boyfriend who was killed after she agreed to marry him. Now she felt uncomfortable with men. Marcia was eagerly anticipating seeing Jaffa again and wanted to tell her how she really felt about her, but she didn't actually know where Jaffa lived. In her final letter to Marcia, Jaffa said she would leave her new address with two 19-year-old guys she knew in Phoenix named Ken and Mike. This toast is really good.
You like it? I fried it in bacon.
Oh, wow.
Everything is fried in bacon grease.
If you hear some rumble distortions in the audio, that's just my stomach.
After arriving at the duplex where Ken and Mike lived, they had some trouble getting the correct address where they could find Jaffa. Eventually, they forced Ken and Mike at gunpoint to take them to Jaffa's trailer home, which was nearly 30 miles outside of Phoenix, where she lived with a guy named Bob. They all spent some time together drinking and doing drugs, and Jaffa described to her guests the abusive relationship she had endured while living with Ken. Marcia stayed for a while at the trailer, although she never did muster the courage to confess her love to Jaffa. On October 22nd, having neither seen nor heard from Doug and Willie for 6 days, Jaffa purchased a plane ticket for Marcia to return to Denver. Meanwhile, Doug and Willie had returned to Ken and Mike's home, and they forced the two men at gunpoint into their Volkswagen van. Willie decided they should go to California. Willie was hatching a plan for a big heist, and he wanted to use the van. Problem was, he needed to get rid of Ken and Mike before they got to town. After driving around for a while, Willie told Doug to park the van close to Little John Creek in Knight's Ferry, where Ken and Mike were told to walk down a creek bed. Both were then bound with microphone cord and rope. Willie told the men that he and Doug were going to leave and ordered them to wait 1 hour before attempting to free themselves. However, as they were leaving, he changed his mind, and they returned to the creek. He decided they couldn't leave witnesses, so they strangled and stabbed the men to death before stripping off their clothes and hiding their bodies in the reeds. This would be Doug Gretzler's first murder, but not his last. He later gave an account of the experience, saying, "That's the dirtiest way I know to kill somebody. That's probably the reason why I could take so many deaths as that, because after the first, I was steeled too. I never seen anything like that before. It made me sick." And he was kicking and shuddering, and blood came out of his eyes. And it was like his head was exploding.
And Gretzler, up to this point, has never been known to even do any violent crimes.
Yeah, well, now it seems like it's non-stop crimes.
Yeah, and this is just the start of this. This is just the beginning. It's crazy. This is a crazy story.
By October 20th, the van had broken down, and Doug and Willie began to hitchhike. They were picked up by a young couple. Jim, the young man, was ordered at gunpoint to drive them to Santa Clara, although they stopped close to the town of Marshall, where Jim was bound and a gun pressed to his head. "I know I don't have much say in this, but please don't hurt Eileen, okay? Please don't hurt her," he pleaded. Willie seemed unnerved, and instead of killing Jim, he stuffed him into the trunk of the car. Later, he pulled Eileen out of the car and into some bushes, intent on having his way with her. However, they emerged again in a few minutes. A frustrated Willie got into the car, gunned the engine, and peeled away. It's not clear what actually happened, but it seemed to Doug that Willie may not have been able to accomplish what he wanted. The next morning, the couple were robbed and released.
Okay, see, like, this is why I have never tried hitchhiking, and I never pick up hitchhikers.
Yeah. But I mean, today, when you think about hitchhiking, you're like, oh, that's crazy that you just
Yeah.
get picked up by some random person.
Of course, now there's like Uber and Lyft
Yeah.
and stuff. People do that all the
And
time.
most people have their own cars. There's
Yeah.
buses, there's, you could do whatever you want.
I suppose this is like, what, early 70s?
Yeah, and like, I don't think people thought like, oh, this random guy's gonna just stab me and garrote me, you know?
Well,
I'm surprised I ate all these eggs.
yeah, that was like a stack of eggs on your plate.
Usually, I can eat like one or two, and then I get like grossed out.
You get gross.
Mm-hmm.
Why?
Because they're good up until a point.
Yeah.
Doug and Willie stole a brown Ford sedan after releasing the young couple they had kidnapped. They were aware they would probably be reported to the police for the kidnapping and robbery. Also of concern was that Bob and Yaffa in Arizona could link them to the disappearances of Ken and Mike. Willie decided they should return to Arizona. On the way back, they picked up an 18-year-old hitchhiker named Steven, who decided to travel all the way back with them. Back at Yaffa and Bob's trailer, the five of them spent the evening drinking, smoking, and taking drugs. As the hours passed, Willie became more and more irritated, especially by Yaffa's talk of magic and all of Steve's talk about football. The next afternoon, when Bob drove Yaffa to work, Steve and Willie got into an argument. When the 6'1" tall, 180-pound Steve challenged him, Willie realized it would be a fight he couldn't win. So he grabbed his gun and a sleeping bag, and he, Doug, and Steve drove to a deserted gully close to the Superstition Mountains, where Willie took Steve's wallet and then ordered him to crawl inside the sleeping bag. Willie then shot him in the head. Willie decided that Bob needed to be killed, partly because he feared that he suspected their involvement in the disappearances of Ken and Mike, but also because his subservient lifestyle with Yaffa bothered him. Yaffa was the breadwinner of the two, and Bob mostly just hung around getting high, chauffeuring her around and doing what she wanted. After sundown, while Yaffa was at work, Doug came up behind Bob and strangled him with an electrical cord, then shot him in the head to ensure his death. Doug and Willie then hid his body under a mattress in his bedroom. Later, Willie picked up Yaffa from work and drove her home. He made up a story about how there had been a drug bust not far from there, and that Bob was freaking out about all the, quote, narcs snooping around, and so they had driven Bob out of town for a few days to lay low. Yaffa said he was getting on her nerves anyway. "He's nothing but a leech," she said, "and I'm getting tired of taking care of him." The next day, Yaffa decided to call in sick to work, just to have a day off. Willie tried to persuade her to go to work so they could dispose of Bob's body, but she refused. Shortly after dusk that evening, Yaffa performed a ritual prayer at an altar she had made in her living room. As she kneeled, Willie crept up behind her, wrapped a towel around the barrel of his gun, and shot her in the head. After the murders, some neighbor girls came by looking for Yaffa. The girls knew their parents didn't like them hanging around the place, probably because of all the drug use going on there. But the girls went inside the trailer anyway. When they heard someone outside, they feared their parents would find them, so they ran to hide in the bedroom where the body of Bob was laying, only partially hidden by the mattress. Luckily for them, the room was dark and they didn't see anything. Willie and Doug quickly ushered them out the door.
Are you not gonna drink your cold brew coffee?
Have you touched your coffee yet?
No, I
What?
stirred it.
I think
She's just gonna make it seem like she drank it and then.
Okay, I'll drink it. I don't usually drink coffee.
But it's dark roast.
Oh, it's
Tasty?
it's cold and kind of bitter.
Doug and Willie fled Apache Junction in Bob's Chevy truck on October 26th, but abandoned the vehicle hours later and then traveled to Tucson via bus. On the evening of November 1st, they decided to steal a car to leave the city. Near the University of Arizona, they hijacked a Dodge Charger being driven by a 19-year-old named Gilbert Sierra. Willie forced Gilbert into the trunk of his car before driving to a deserted canyon close to Gates Pass, where Willie dragged the man from the trunk at gunpoint, forced him to hand over his t-shirt, then ordered him to his knees. Willie twice attempted to shoot Gilbert, although each time the pistol misfired as he had covered the firearm with the t-shirt. Gilbert took the opportunity to make a run for it, but quickly Willie removed the t-shirt from the gun and shot him in the back. Gilbert collapsed and fell into a small ravine, where Willie followed to shoot him again at close range as Doug laughed maniacally. They later abandoned the stolen vehicle in a parking lot. On the morning of November 3rd, a student named Vincent saw the two men hitchhiking and stopped to offer them a lift. After Doug and Willie entered his vehicle and pulled a gun on him, he started panicking. Doug took over the driving, and moments later, Vincent leaped out of the moving vehicle and ran away, and then reported the incident to police. Willie realized that if the cops weren't already looking for them, they definitely were now. They needed a place to lay low for a bit, change their appearance, and then get out of town. As they drove around, they saw a condominium complex and a man outside washing his car. The man was a 28-year-old former Marine Corps captain named Michael Sandberg. Michael was preparing to take the car out for a drive later with his wife. Willie threatened Michael with his gun, forcing him to take them to his condo where his 32-year-old wife Patricia was in the kitchen. Patricia had just gotten off the phone with her parents, talking to them about their upcoming visit from California to Tucson to visit for Thanksgiving, and mentioning to them how they planned to start a family soon. Doug pressed a knife to Patricia's neck, and Willie informed the couple they would be there until after dusk, and then leave them unharmed. However, Willie was getting paranoid that the cops were closing in on them. Doug dyed his blonde hair brown, and Willie shaved off his mustache and attempted to disguise a black eye he had recently received with Patricia's cosmetics. Both also changed into clean clothes from Michael's closet. Doug bound both Patricia and Michael. Patricia was put on the couch and Michael on the bed. After turning the stereo up, Doug walked into the bedroom and shot Michael in the head, then shot Patricia in the head. However, Patricia still seemed to be alive, so Willie fired 4 more rounds into her head. Patricia kept moving, and Willie grabbed a golf club and repeatedly bludgeoned her until she was finally still. Doug and Willie wiped the place down to try and remove their fingerprints, packed some of Michael's clothes into a suitcase, and stole the victim's credit cards and other items of material value. Then they fled in the Sandberg's car. I'm going to be honest with you, I'm feeling a little sick.
From eggs.
I don't know if it's the egg or the talk of nonstop murdering, but yeah, I'm not feeling so good. Yeah, I think.
Willie and Doug drove into California, towards Willie's hometown of Lodi. Willie talked about robbing the owners of the United Market, telling Doug that the owners had a lot of money and claimed they were involved in criminal activity, and that's why they were wealthy. However, under all of Willie's big talk and bravado, he really had a chip on his shoulder as he thought about his hometown and everyone there who had made him feel small and unimportant. By the time Doug and Willie reached the United Market, the store had already closed for the evening. The robbery was already off to a bad start. But Willie knew where the owner lived, and so they drove the couple miles to his home. When they arrived at the house, they discovered that the owners of the market, Walter and Joanne Parkin, were not home. They had gone bowling that night, a usual ritual for a Tuesday evening. The neighbor girl, 18-year-old Debbie Earl, would come over to babysit the Parkins' 9-year-old son Bobby and 11-year-old daughter Lisa. Debbie's brother Ricky, who was 15, would often come along to keep his sister company. And later, Debbie's fiancé, Mark, would stop by until the Parkins returned and then drive her home. When Doug and Willie approached the Parkins' house and Debbie answered the door, she told them Walter wasn't home. Willie turned around and left, and Debbie immediately called her father Richard, asking him to come over because she was frightened by the two strange men. "So now what?" Doug asked Willie. "This was all we had." After they had come all that way, and all they had done to get there, after all the talk of big money, and where they would go and what they would buy with it, it was going to be their jackpot, and it was their only real plan they had. "Let's just do it," Willie decided. Willie came back to the door and asked to use the phone, explaining that he was just there because he owed Wally some money and wanted to repay him before leaving town. But after getting inside the house, he pulled a gun on the teens and had them sit on the sofa. Not long after, Debbie's father arrived at the house, where he too was held at gunpoint. Richard informed Willie and Doug that his wife Wanda would be calling the police if he wasn't back home in 15 minutes. So Willie had Doug watch the hostages while he went with Richard to get his wife and bring her back to the Parkin house. As everyone sat waiting for Wally to return, then Debbie's fiancé, 20-year-old Mark, arrived to pick up Debbie and her brother. He was also taken hostage. When Walter and Joanne Parkin finally returned home at approximately 10:45 p.m., they found a full house, including two strangers with guns. Everyone was forced to hand over all the money and jewelry in their possession, and the two children were allowed to be put to bed in the master bedroom. Then Doug bound everyone else with nylon cord and ordered them to sit inside a large walk-in closet. Doug again kept an eye on all the hostages as Willie forced Walter to drive to the United Market and retrieve all the money from the safe. It ended up being approximately $4,000, the equivalent of about $26,840 as of 2023. Then they returned to the Parkin residence, where Walter was also bound and placed in the walk-in closet. The hostages were then tied together by their ankles and gagged. According to Doug, once he and Willie had wiped their fingerprints from surfaces around the house, he suggested to Willie, "Listen, why don't we split? We got what we came here for, let's just get out of here." But Willie refused, reminding him, "I said all along, no witnesses. I know you remember me saying it." Despite any misgiving Doug might have had, he didn't argue. Willie told him Doug had to be the one to kill everyone. Willie wasn't sure if he could do it because he knew them. Doug first went to the master bedroom, placed the gun between the eyes of each child, and shot them as they slept. Then they went to the walk-in closet, where the remaining 7 hostages had begun desperately screaming and writhing. Doug shot each one in the head. Then Willie took over, shooting round after round into the victims. After the bloody massacre, Doug went to the kitchen and found some chocolate birthday cake. It had just been Joanne's birthday, and it was soon to be Bobby's 10th birthday. He ate a slice of the cake and washed it down with some wine. Willie drank from a bottle of Seagram's as he searched the house for more money and valuables before they finally left. At 3 a.m., Carol Jenkins arrived at the Parkins house after going out on a date. Carol was a young woman who worked for Wally and Joanne at the United Market and was staying with the Parkin family. Incidentally, she had worked with Willie Steelman back when he was an orderly at the convalescent hospital. Carol had an uneasy feeling as she entered the house, but went to bed, trying not to wake anyone, only to be awakened herself several hours later by a couple friends of Mark. Mark hadn't come home, and his mother was worried about him. Carol went to find Wally or Joanne and see if they knew where Mark might be. She went to the master bedroom and then ran out screaming. When officers entered the house, they discovered the bloody bodies of the 2 Parkin children in the master bedroom. As the rest of the house was searched, they discovered a horrifying scene in the walk-in closet where 7 bodies lay on the floor, riddled with bullets. Autopsies would later reveal 27 bullet wounds in the victims. By this time, police in California and Arizona were already searching for Doug and Willie after the slew of crimes they had committed, and warrants had been issued for their arrests in both states. Descriptions were given of the 2 by some of their victims who had survived their encounters, and some of them could even give names to the authorities. Detectives also flew to Denver to talk to Marcia and find out what she knew about Willie and Doug. She initially refused to cooperate, but when one of the detectives threw some crime scene photos on the table, revealing the bloated corpse of Yaffa, Marcia was horrified. She gave them details of robberies and carjackings the pair had committed and paying for motel rooms with stolen checks. After Doug and Willie were linked to multiple murders, police knew they were dealing with 2 very dangerous men. They decided to give a recent mugshot of Willie to the press in hopes someone would spot them soon. Willie and Doug decided to lay low for a few days in Sacramento, where they checked into the Clooney Hotel. On the morning of November 8th, Willie purchased a copy of a newspaper from the hotel lobby, only to find his mugshot on the front page. He knew they needed to flee and realized the stolen car they had was too risky to use. After meeting a young woman named Melinda, who worked at a massage parlor, he went to her apartment and tried to convince her to travel with them out of the state. A desk clerk at the hotel had recognized Willie after he saw the newspaper mugshot and called the police. Within minutes, armed police had converged on the hotel, unbeknownst to Doug, who returned there to pick up their belongings. He thought he was safe, as, unlike Willie, he didn't have a criminal past or a mugshot. However, he was still recognized by police, who sealed off his escape and captured him. At the time of Doug's arrest, he admitted to police, "Man, I'm glad this is over. I've seen enough killing, and man, I don't want to see any more." He then gave police the address where they could find Willie. Over 70 armed police officers arrived outside Melinda's apartment. Even though Willie had previously bragged that he would never be taken alive, he eventually surrendered to police after being assured media would be present outside to record his arrest and after demanding that a disc jockey announce live on a local rock radio station that he and the young woman would not be harmed.
We have to sit here till you eat this whole stick of butter too. That we didn't use, we just put there.
What was the butter for?
Toast.
Oh.
I know people can just watch me burp while she drinks things.
There was a plethora of evidence linking Doug and Willie to the crimes committed, including the money stolen from the United Market, which was found in their possession. Doug also had the Sandbergs' door key on his keyring. When police searched the hotel room, they found a .38 caliber revolver that matched the weapon used in numerous homicides, and a stolen checkbook. In the stolen vehicle, they found blood-stained clothes and a brown grocery sack filled with wallets, purses, credit cards, IDs, and jewelry belonging to the victims murdered at the Perkin residence. Although at first, Willie was uncooperative and Doug was cooperative but lied about what had happened, eventually both men confessed to all the murders. Since the men were wanted in both California and Arizona, both states fought over who got to try them in court. California would go first, and they were tried jointly for the murders of the Parkin and Earl families in June of 1974. On July 8th, both were sentenced to life imprisonment. Doug for 9 counts of murder, and Willie for 9 counts of murder and 5 counts of robbery. Upon passing sentence, the judge described Willie Steelman as the architect and engineer of the murders, and Doug Gretzler as a willing follower in the commission of the crime. And he recommended neither ever be freed from prison.
In my opinion, I think Steelman definitely influenced.
It seems like it because, like, before he met that guy, he hadn't done too much crime, and then all of a sudden they're just non-stop crime.
Yeah, stabbing and garroting people.
Yeah.
But I think, he just took to it like oh, then.
He didn't seem to have a problem with that.
No, it wasn't like he was like a backseat
Yeah.
driver. He was like up front helping him drive,
The two were then extradited to Arizona for the murders of Michael and Patricia Sandberg and Gilbert Sierra on September 17th. And a gag order was issued prohibiting any pre-trial publicity. However, because of the commotion the murders had caused in Tucson, the trials were moved. Willie was brought to trial at the Apache County Courthouse in St. John's, Arizona. He was found guilty of first-degree murder and sentenced to death on August 27, 1975. On the day of his verdict, he was found with a handmade knife, 3 inches long, buried in his afro. It was made out of the metal lid of a tobacco can. Doug's trial was moved to Prescott, Arizona, where he was found guilty of 2 counts of first-degree murder and guilty of kidnapping and robbery. He was sentenced to death on November 12, 1976, at the age of 25 years old.
So, this was a crazy crime spree, and it's just like a crazy story about these 2 guys. And I think with all these murders, people were pretty anxious, especially this jury. They're like, oh, these are some terrible, horrible people.
He would spend years appealing his sentence in Arizona courts, and his case was tied up in federal courts for many more years. During this time, battles were being fought over the constitutionality of the death penalty, which further held up any executions. But in 1988, Doug told his appeals attorney he had no interest in continuing attempts to keep him alive. Although Willie Steelman was sentenced to death, he never actually saw the execution chamber. He died of liver cirrhosis in August 1986, after 10 years on death row. Drugs weren't too difficult to get on death row, and prison staff often looked the other way if it meant keeping prisoners more subdued. However, by the early 90s, Doug Gretzler had gotten clean, and perhaps for the first time, he started evaluating his life and the effect of his actions on others. He was executed by lethal injection in Florence, Arizona, on June 3, 1998. The condemned man spent his last few months writing letters that were mailed after his death. A letter for all the victims' families, everybody he could find. Just before his execution, the 47-year-old Douglas Gretzler said, "From the bottom of my soul, I am so deeply sorry, and have been for years, for murdering Patricia and Michael Sandberg. Though I am being executed for that crime, I apologize to all 17 victims and their families."
So why do you think the breakfast meal? That's kind of weird, isn't it?
No, it seems like a lot of people when I've been doing research, they like that breakfast. I want my bacon, my eggs, and my toast.
It's interesting.
It's either breakfast or steak.
If one thing is clear, it is that there was a lot of illicit drug use by the people involved in this story. Ultimately, the courts decided that drugs certainly did not excuse the horrific acts committed by Douglas Gretzler and William Steelman. However, it does make one think about the relationship between mind-altering drugs and psychological disorders. Can addressing underlying mental health help with addiction recovery and vice versa? By providing people with help they need in these areas, could we prevent future violent behavior or self-destructive behavior? There are a number of charitable organizations seeking to address these issues, such as SAFE Project, Shatterproof, and the Daniel Copersino Foundation. I encourage you to take a look at organizations such as these and donate if you can. Maybe we can make the world a better place together, or at least help someone out there live a better life. This murderous crime spree happened decades ago, and the passage of time really doesn't make what happened any less terrible. There were so many shocking and interesting details and thought-provoking issues that were brought up, many of which we just didn't have time to cover in this episode, such as tie-ins and parallels with Charles Manson, what happened to Doug's sports car, and how did Willie and Doug end up with different murder weapons than the ones they started with, and just so much more. We'll be having a special episode where we talk more about all of these fascinating things, and we'll answer your questions and eat a special meal. To find out more, go to ko-fi.com/thelast-supper. That's ko-fi.com/thelast-supper.
This story was pretty crazy. It was a crazy story. And we want to thank you guys for watching us. And we also want to tell you, don't let this be your last supper. I'm pretty wired from the coffee and the Coke. How much caffeine do you think it has?
like caffeine.
Caffeine content,
We're drinking a soda.
48 milligrams
per serving.
per bottle. Oh, I have to be super weird. How do you chug it like that?
Like this.
No, don't do it. Don't do it. It hurts.
And that's I made sure she drank all her coffee.
It's all gone. Oh.